Yes, good morning, everyone. Super nice to see so many faces, despite the early mornings. I'm very happy to introduce you to Raphael, who is the co-founder and actually design officer of Sweep, one of our portfolio companies, and one of our biggest conviction bets in the sustainability space. Raphael, tell us, what does Sweep do?
Yeah, so I'm not the CEO. That's Rachel, my co-founder. She's great at being a CEO. But yes, I'm one of her co-founders. And at Sweep, we help large companies to reduce their carbon emissions. And so we're a software platform, sort of full climate journey. And we do that, for really large companies across a lot of different stakeholders and teams. And we even help you do that across your company borders with your partners.
And you do that even for Scope 3. And I'm not sure everybody is familiar with Scope 3 emissions, but maybe you can just help us clarify that term for everyone.
Yeah, of course. So, in corporate accounting for greenhouse gases, there's direct emissions. So everything that's happening, in your own proper company, and then Scope 3 are your indirect emissions. That might be, with your investments, with your suppliers. It might be your downstream or upstream transportation. It might even be your staff's business travel. So it's sort of things that are somewhat outside of your control, but they're also very much part of your emissions. And so that's why they tend to be quite hard to tackle. And
it's typically the largest part of the emissions, of a company.
And that's right, yeah. And it depends a bit on what kind of industry you are, of course. But for most companies, that is by far the largest part of your emissions.
Yeah. And I think when we looked at the space, we were kind of very curious to look at the different approaches, because there are companies that try to tackle this via ERP integrations, and I'm sure we're going to hear some of them today. There are others that are trying to do that through proxies on the data side, and Raphael has taken a really interesting approach, because they actually have a product background. So they actually really did this through almost a gamified, user-led approach, which I think is super curious. So tell us a little bit how that works specifically.
Yeah, of course. And of course, Jeannette has done her research before investing, so she knows what she's talking about. We're 4 co-founders, right? And so we have a background in business intelligence, so making sense of large amounts of business data. And so my co-founder, Rachel, and her partner, Nico, they had started a company called Bioanalytics. It was all about integrating different data sets and crunching large amounts of data. And that eventually got acquired by Zendesk, which is where we met. And so we have this really strong background in, lot of data, and when we thought about going into the space, and we really wanted to make a difference with this venture, we realized that carbon is a data problem, and so we bring that into this. But then my personal background is actually business, but then also design, and so you're right in pointing out that we really think that smart design, storytelling is also really important to then make this massive amount of data actually actionable. And when we look at large organizations, right, so far usually you might have one person that's in charge of the carbon footprint, and they might run a report once a year, and it might be some Excel spreadsheet and maybe a nice slide deck, and that's where it dies, right? And what's amazing is we see that more and more companies have really strong experts in carbon in their company. But the reality also is that every single decision every of your staff makes every day can increase or decrease your emissions. And so how do you break this down and bring this to all your staff in different teams and different departments, and how do you make that digestible for them so they can take action? And that's very much where I think design comes into play and is really important to us. And yeah, that's obviously where the gamification piece comes in as well, because if we can visualize how different people and teams are performing, we can sort of start pitching them against each other a bit. And that's, for all ambitious people, and I think that's where the real magic happens.
It's great. I think because it also allows you to kind of create a bottom-up movement within the company. And I think what you're doing is very interesting also from a thesis around consumerization of enterprise. We're actually sitting here on the consumer app stage, I think, which is ironic because we're actually selling to enterprise, or you guys are selling to enterprise. But as a thesis from our fund, we actually very much believe in the fact that users no longer want a stark difference between their personal usage of social media and then basically whatever they interface with on the business and working side of things. So I think you are one of the, let's say, ideal poster child of how to actually make an app so enjoyable and make an interface so enjoyable for the user that they actually want to spend time there and they actually want to engage.
Well, thank you. It's a massive, massive scissor we're trying to bridge, right? Because on one hand, we're building a tool for the power users, right? And we actually work a lot with carbon consultancies, right? That really want to go deep, and they like our tool because we give you, all the pro functions. And that's complex, right? And it's a lot of options and sort of a lot of detail. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you might have, your person running your travel program, and they're not a carbon expert, and they're not going to be one, right away, maybe over time. And so we do have these very different user personas in the product. But then, in the end, good design is important for each of those, of course, just sort of different requirements.
Yeah, and you do that with 4 co-founders, which is quite unique, I think, to a startup. How does that work?
Yeah. So there's me plus 3, so we're 4 in total. We get that question a lot, because I think it's usually 1, 2, and then 3 is already, a lot. We love it, and I think we're very complementary in skills. We have 2 founders who are very much sort of geeky data devs, but one a bit more of sort of the bird's eye view, and one very deep in the details. That's Jeannette and Nico. And then Rachel, she's our lobbyist, she's our runner, she's our CEO. She runs our financials as well, with a focus. And then I come in as sort of the brand marketing comms design person. And so it's really great to bring all these skills together, I think. And we're also quite different in personalities. And I think some of us are a bit more just going for it, no regrets. And then I think I'm a bit more the diplomat, actually. The Swiss in me is a bit more like, let's look at it from all sides. And so I think we really keep each other in check there. And finally, what I would say as well is, running a startup is intense, right? And so I think if you're 4, there might be one of us that's a bit down or a bit stressed out about something, and there's always somebody else to pull you back up. Right? So I think for us, it works really well. And, we've all worked together before, so we also knew what we got ourselves into. Yeah,
and this team is just a force of nature, especially Rachel, the CEO. She's, I think, one of the best examples of female-led entrepreneurs and CEOs. But tell me a little bit about the customer base you guys engage with. Like, what is the, what is your read on the types of companies that are most engaged? Like, how has the early traction kind of unfolded for you?
Yeah. So we want the dirtiest, right? So the really dirty ones, as in big companies with big carbon footprints. That's what we're optimizing the tool for. That's why we're going, after enterprise, sort of out of the box. And I can give you one example. So we work with Saint-Gobain, it's a French industrial company, and they essentially sort of produce all the construction materials. This glass was probably made by Saint-Gobain, and so they have, really big footprints. And for them, what we find is, carbon management is not a branding piece. It's not something maybe the staff are asking for. For them, this is really business critical, right? They know that they're so carbon intensive, and so they need to make a change. And with them, they have an amazing team in-house that really knows what they're doing. And they just need the tooling for that. And so we find that these large companies where carbon is really crucial to them, they're the ones that understand that this is not an easy task, and they put the resources there, which is where we can do our magic. And that's what we tend to optimize for. And we also find that these really big companies, talking about scope 3 again, that's your value chain, that's your network. And so if we can find these sort of these connectors in industries that have really big networks, this has the potential to pull the whole industry along. And so that's where we see us having the biggest leverage.
Yeah, and how do you think about the actual KPIs that you use to measure engagement on the user side? Is that different from customer to customer, or how does that unfold?
You mean engagement of the users in the
and definitely end users. Like, what kind of KPIs do you see these different customers that you have? Saint-Gobain being one, but you have others as well. Measure.
It really depends now, and so I think it really also depends, where on that journey the company is on. And so we find that companies that have a bit less maturity in managing carbon, it tends to be one person, that just takes care of that, and you sort of have to ease them in, and we might do a pilot, and we show them, what the potential is if they start inviting the whole company into this as well. Mm-hmm. But with Saint-Gobain, for example, now, they have thousands of manufacturing plants, and they're all, it's a big conglomerate, so they bought up a lot of companies, and so it's a lot of sort of businesses within the business. Mm-hmm. And there we're just rolling this out now to all the companies. And the magic really happens when everybody chips in, right? And you also make people responsible for actually.
Yeah, and I think that's actually an interesting point with regards to network effect, right? Or with regards to how you guys can ultimately also grow from the lower user base and sort of have a bottom-up effect into new customers. Can you just tell us a little bit how you think about that also from a product perspective?
Yeah. I said we realized carbon is a data problem, right? I think that's really important, and it's a lot about understanding very sort of disparate sources of information and turning that into carbon emissions that you can track and that you can reduce. The other piece is it's a network problem, right? That's the Scope 3 thing again. We work with some other large companies, an American tech company, where they set a goal to bring down the emissions of their value chain by 50% by 2030, right? And usually, I'm sort of amazed, right? How companies tend to set these targets just sort of, in the boardroom, being like, yeah, I don't know, 50% by 2030 sounds good, and then somebody has to figure out how to do it. And in that case now, we're actually, we're building this system where all their suppliers can sign up to Sweep. And that might be some larger companies, but that's also a lot of just really small companies, 50 to 100 people. And for them, carbon now is not that crucial, right? For them, they might not actually have that much emissions. They're quite small. It's quite sort of, they don't have that much pressure. Now this big technology company is starting to apply the pressure. And so we take them onto this journey. And we help them understand their footprint and set targets, and then all this bubbles up into that master account, of the company that we're working with, and they start to get this really full and comparable picture, on carbon emissions across their whole value chain, and they can start sort of pushing tasks into that value chain as well, and that's where the network piece gets really powerful. And we think also, as if you're a single company and you might get your servers from AWS, and you have very little sort of power to get them to give you the data, maybe to start making change. As we start to create these networks and connect them together, I think it also really gives us sort of the power of the collective to demand change.
Yeah. One more macro question: how do you think about the green movement or sustainability movement more broadly, and then if you break it down to sort of the activist part of it, right, I think which plays one role, and innovation, how would you weigh the two, and how do you think they come to the most fruitful interplay?
Yeah, it's interesting. We were at COP26, and of course you sort of see all the sides, right? You see the blah blah happening. And
maybe just quickly explain what that is for maybe the.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So COP26, the Conference of Parties in Glasgow. I hope most of you have heard about it. And yeah, so you sort of see all the parts of the movement, and even in our company, of course, we have some people who are with Extinction Rebellion and are quite forceful about their opinions, and then we also have people that are quite new to climate and just want to make a difference, but aren't quite that militant or maybe not that deep in it yet. Our thing is, we really, when we started talking about doing a business, we had all sorts of ideas, and then we really went for climate because we realized that's what we want to do and where we want to make a difference, and we want to move our skills into this market. We also feel like we shouldn't apologize to want to create a big business, right? And I think so we're sort of on this mission to show the world that you can build a really successful business and generate a lot of value while also generating a lot of good for the planet. And we don't see this as a contradiction. We sort of want to prove that that can go hand in hand and unlock something really beautiful.
Yeah, and I think that's actually one of the few cases where European regulation is actually kicking in for the better. Because it's just I think every time we make an introduction for you guys to the large company, they always say, what are we talking? Oh my God, yes, I need this. Yeah. Send them over. So I think it's that in that case, I think European regulation has really done a lot of good for companies like yours.
Yeah, and it can be a challenge in a way as well now, because obviously, we eat our own dog food, right? So we measure our emissions with Sweep, and our emissions are tiny. We're fully remote. We don't have offices. All we have is a bit of server. We've hardly traveled the last 1.5 years. So our emissions are only going to grow, right? And so I think as a business, you sort of have to prove. In our case, we would think our growth is sort of very much in line with reducing emissions, even though our own proper emissions will definitely increase. It's sort of a challenge.
Thank you so much, Raphael. Thank you guys for listening.
Thanks so much. Cheers.
Thank you very much.